Winter 2022 may not have a show like Mushoku Tensei, but it does bring us quite a few more lighthearted isekai and fantasy. Returning series like Arifureta and The Realist Hero alongside brand new installments like The Strongest Sage and Tensai Oji. It's definitely the weakest season of isekai we've gotten in a while, but perhaps one or two may prove to be somewhat entertaining. So, starting with the sequels. First, we have the second season of Princess Connect ReDive, the 2020 fantasy from the same director of Konosuba that does well to bring much of that same iconic humor to a different series. And while yes, it is an adaptation of a mobile game, that certainly doesn't detract from the quality like how you think it would. The animation is very reminiscent of what you would see from Konosuba, and most of the characters possess their own quirky charms that work fairly well together. The story isn't anything particularly deep, but that basic premise of a protagonist who's simply trying to regain his memories does leave plenty of room for comedic inserts. So if you're a fan of Konosuba and the type of comedy it provides, then you're definitely going to want to watch this one. It's a good filler series that'll make the wait for the next Konosuba anime a bit more manageable. On a slightly different note, next we have the surprisingly quick release of the second season of Realist Hero, a series that was actually a lot better than I was expecting it to be. The way it takes the typical isekai protagonist, then makes him into this unconventional type of hero was quite refreshing in a season filled with your more traditional isekai. There was something about his unique administrative approach to problems that just made it entertaining to watch. So, if you're a fan of shows that focus more on politics and economics, then you'd probably like Realist Hero for the way it showcases that. It does well to highlight a lot of the intricacies that come with running a nation. And while there is still the aspects of war and adventure, the unique nature of this series allows us to see it from a different perspective. Now, if you're looking for more of that classic power fantasy stuff, then I'm sure you're already planning to watch Arifureta Season 2. A remarkably popular series considering how low rated it is. I mean, out of all the shows I've ever covered in the past, this one is by far the one that I'm most often asked to go back to. Like, one of my videos even has 1 million views on it. I didn't even know 1 million people watch this show. So, due to popular demand, this is the series that I'll be covering this season. Cut content may be a little difficult considering how fast the anime blazes through the novels, but perhaps I can make it work if the pacing slows down. In any case, this season will start things off from right where we left it. With Kaori being the newest addition to the party, Hajime and his harem will find themselves traversing a new labyrinth, an adventure that will eventually lead us to the introduction of this new character here. I can't say too much else without spoiling some of the plot, but she's definitely a focal point from the next couple of arcs. As for the animation, it doesn't seem like much has changed when it comes to the inclusion of CG, but at the very least I don't think it'll look as bad as it did in the first season. So perhaps we'll be able to see an improvement in both quality and pacing. Even if we don't though, I'm sure plenty of you will still end up watching anyway since we all know you secretly enjoyed the first season. It's okay, I'm not embarrassed to admit that I did either. There's just something oddly satisfying about seeing an underdog like Hajime gain so much power. Moving on to the new isekai now. First we have Studio ACAT's Kenja no Denshi, otherwise known as she professed herself Pupil of the Wiseman. As a veteran wizard player from a popular VR MMO, our protagonist decides to change his avatar's appearance right before getting summoned into the game for real. So rather than being one of the renowned 9 sages that he built himself up to be, he instead now has the appearance of this innocent little girl. An identity he's too afraid to reveal once belonged to one of the most skilled magicians. In a similar vein, next we have The Strongest Sage with the Weakest Crest, a light novel adaptation by J.C. Staff which deals with that similar premise of an OP spellcaster stuck in a different body. Though this isn't an isekai like the anime before, it has all the generic themes and elements that you'd expect from one. The only difference is that, rather than our protagonist being some otaku from Japan, he's instead a world-famous sage who reincarnated himself in an attempt to get stronger. Because his previous body wasn't very well suited for combat, he decided the best course of action was to seal his soul for rebirth later, an action that would have him reborn in an era where mankind is far weaker than they were before. So, as I'm sure you could tell, it's actually pretty similar to the misfit of Demon King Academy. Not only do we have the OP character who's reborn into a completely different era, but we also have the whole mysterious subplot that goes towards explaining why the times have changed so much. Now, I don't think it'll be nearly as entertaining, but if you're looking for a good old OP protagonist who's constantly shocking everyone, then this is definitely the show for you. Continuing with the other isekai now. Next we have Studio Maho Films' adaptation of In the Land of Leadale, another video game isekai in which the protagonist we're following somehow ends up summoned into the game for real. And just like how it was with the Wiseman's Pupil, so too is this character given the same body as her avatar. So it's not like this isn't anything that we haven't seen before, but it's also not a plot built on your typical tropes either. It's more so a free-spirited adventure with no clear focus, kind of like how Slime 300 was. There is the classic fantasy adventure elements, but it's definitely weighted more towards slice of life than it is the action. Now, the last isekai on our list is yet another series that seems to center around that whole gender bender theme. A manga adaptation coming from Studio OLM that places two unlikely characters right into the middle of a fantasy world. What makes this one different from all the others though is that this duo of childhood friends who are now in their 30s find themselves at the mercy of a goddess's mischief. You see, not only were they sent to a completely different world, but because they pissed off the goddess who was sending them there, one of them was turned into a girl, then both were cursed to fall in love with each other. So, despite that sounding completely ridiculous, apparently it makes for quite the comedic dynamic. It's not the world or the adventure that makes this series entertaining, but instead the interactions between these two main characters. The way their personalities clash in these unexpected situations does well to support what's essentially a comical journey between two bros. Moving on, next we have another comedic fantasy titled The Genius Prince's Guide to Raising a Nation Out of Debt. A series that may look somewhat similar to Realist Hero, but instead deals with a main character who's far less noble. Yes, he is the ruler of his own nation, but in actuality he couldn't care less about what happens to it. That's supposed to be our first impression of him. But as we quickly find out, this prince is apparently too smart to even sell out his own nation properly. His initial plan to betray his kingdom for the right price quickly backfires when his accidental accomplishments start gaining him the favor of his people. So what we have is essentially a protagonist who tries to portray themselves as evil, but in reality just ends up doing more good because of it. I can't say it's something that's extremely unique, but it does approach the Realist Hero premise in a way that could prove to be quite entertaining. I think it all just depends on how well they end up developing the Genius Prince's motivations. Now, the last series on our list is the post-apocalyptic fantasy Sabikui Bisco, a light novel adaptation from the newly established Studio Oz that presents what looks to be quite the interesting setting. It's not a series I'm extremely familiar with myself, but the quality of what we're shown in the trailers does seem to be promising. So if you're looking for a new show to jump into blind, then this would be my recommendation in a season that isn't offering much else. We do still have the entertainment arc for Demon Slayer, as well as the actual final season for Attack on Titan, but aside from those, I don't think there's anything else that's really standing out this season. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I've got for you guys. If any of these caught your eye, then be sure to let me know which ones in the comments. I'm curious to know which ones you're planning on watching. And if you haven't already, then be sure to subscribe to catch some of that weekly Arifureta content. I think there will be a good mix of lore and cut content to make the series even better. So be sure to check back next week for that. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!